I'm John Haskins. I'm the Dean of Students at the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia University in the city of New York. As the Dean of Students, I oversee admissions, student life, and also career services. We have this webinar set up today as part of our recruiting season to reach out to you, prospective students who want to come to Columbia. And I see some other ones here who are some other staff members are joining this conversation too. We really wanted to address a lot of concerns that we hear from prospective students when we're recruiting, both online and in person. Even this week, the staff was at Atlanta at Spelman, Morehouse and Clark recruiting. We're at Howard, and we are heading to any number of job fairs around the country coming forward. And we're also doing a lot of online sessions. So today specifically, we're here to address issues of building diversity at the Columbia Journalism School. So I will be moderating the discussion, but we will also have Dean Jelani Cobb and adjunct professor Alexis Clark. So Jelani Cobb was named the Dean of the Graduate School of Journalism this summer. Dean Cobb has been a professor at the school since 2016, a staff writer at The New Yorker, an author, a documentary producer, and the director of the Ira A. Littman Center for Journalism in Civil and Human Rights. He has written books on the election of President Barack Obama and the history of hip hop, and has been a contributor to the Washington Post, Vibe, and Essence. A graduate of Howard University, Dean Cobb taught previously at the University of Connecticut and at Spelman College. Alexis Clark has been an adjunct professor at the school for 7 years and is also a graduate of the program. She completed her undergraduate degree at Spelman College. Professor Clark has been a practicing journalist in New York since graduating from Columbia. She's been a contributor to the History Channel, the New York Times, and Matter of Fact with Soledad O'Brien, and was previously a senior editor at Town and Country magazine. She is the author of Enemies in Love, A German POW, A Black Nurse, and An Unlikely Romance. I am going to begin this discussion just to familiarize yourselves with our speakers here today by asking each one of them about their road to journalism and how they got to Pulitzer Hall, which is where we are on the Upper West Side of New York. Can I start with you, Dean Cobb?
I keep giving you the same answer. I took the one train. I got off at 116th Street. Building was right there in front of me.
Excellent answer, Alexis. No, Dean Cobb.
So if you want the slightly longer version of that, like I suspect like many of us, my interest in current affairs, journalism, writing, since I'm mainly a print-oriented person, those things emerged fairly early. And when I started writing seriously in college, I would, occasionally contribute things to the school newspaper at Howard, which is called The Hilltop. And then after graduation was when I started kind of writing, pitches and sending things out and freelancing. And over time, I began to make connections. The first place I actually worked was at an alternative paper in Washington, D.C. called the Washington City Paper. And from there, I have a slightly atypical route, which is that from the city paper, I went to graduate school and earned a PhD in American history, but then kind of always kept a foot in the journalism world, and which culminated in me starting to write for the New Yorker about 10 years ago. I think I've been at the New Yorker for 10 years. And I came here in 2016, and have been very much happy with the decision that I made to come to Pulitzer Hall, and it has been one of the most rewarding phases of my career.
Thank you very much. That really speaks to the different paths that we have for all the students coming here. Alexis?
Well, I started off like many people. I worked for my high school newspaper. And then when I got to college, I changed my focus. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And by senior year, I took the LSAT, did terribly, didn't fill out one application. I just was scattered. I'm like, what do I want to do? But I always kept going back to journalism and storytelling. But anyway, I worked. I graduated from Spelman and worked. And then I thought, you know what? Maybe I'll teach. And so I entered a PhD program at the University of Virginia. And there I wrote a political piece for the paper there called the Cavalier Daily. And I thought, you know what? It's journalism. There it is again. I'm going back to journalism. So I got a master's, left the PhD program, and applied to Columbia. I decided I wanted to be in New York and I wanted to hone my craft. And literally went from program to program and never looked back. And now I've been in New York 20 years as a journalist.
Well, that's great. Both Dean Cobb and Professor Clark, the reason I wanted to talk about their backgrounds here is really all the faculty members here have a history of working within the industry, and we bring all that expertise for students here as we teach them and help them build their careers. I too was in the industry for about 35 years, mostly at the New York Times before coming here, and pretty much all of our other faculty have had different experience, widely different experiences within the business. I actually would want to talk about the business for a quick second and then come back more specifically to the school and issues of diversity, which is what this call is all about today. So I want to ask both of our panelists today, how, since you entered the field of journalism or started even teaching in journalism, how have you seen newsrooms changing in terms of diversity and inclusion over the years?
Alexis, would you like to start, and I'll follow up with you? Mm-hmm.
Okay, sure. Well, I mean, first, let's think about, diversity and inclusion. They have to come at the top. Who's in the decision-making role? Who determines the stories and the content? Who does the hiring and the firing? It's not enough just to have reporters who represent different demographics. There must be some power in these roles. And over the years, we've seen that the data shows that, yes, there's some brown and Black people and a handful that are in top positions at newspapers and networks and magazines, but the data also shows that it's still mostly white and still male, and the newsrooms aren't reflecting the demographic changes of our population. So there's still work to do. And I have found in my career, obviously the higher you rise, the more autonomy you have, and you are able to pitch stories that you want to report on. And that's why it's so important to have representation in this industry.
Mm-hmm. I think that it's, I appreciate, Professor Clark's comments on this. As a person who, when I first started out, the pathways, especially for young journalists of color, were pretty narrow. It was very difficult to get a foothold. And if you did, there weren't likely to be very many people who looked like you in the vicinity. I think that the consciousness around that has changed over the course of my career. People are more aware of that for a number of reasons. One of which is the kind of demographic changes that are happening in this country, and some of the dynamics that are changing media across the world. And making it more possible for different voices to flourish. And so for the industry, and also for even, this campus and this institution, Columbia Journalism School, and I think over my shoulder, you get a little glimpse of the campus here on this beautiful fall day. But there's been a kind of change of attitudes around this. And it's, for me, a top priority to make sure that we as an institution are reflective of the diversity of the country and the world. And therefore, we make it more possible for the institution itself, and the media, the industry, to be reflective of the very many different experiences, viewpoints, and communities that are being covered.
So I said I did want to bring it back to the school. That's sort of a big picture of what the industry looks like and maybe some changes that you've seen coming into it. But at Columbia, how does Columbia Journalism School work to foster an inclusive community and help students?
Well, first, I will echo Professor Clark's comment. This begins at the top. And so it is, here it is a priority for us to make sure that our admissions pipelines, that we are kind of reaching out to every different community to say that, if you haven't considered a career in journalism, if you haven't specifically considered Columbia Journalism School, we would like you to do so. The other is that, like many other places, we have conversations that are not always the most comfortable. In 2020, after, like many other institutions, we sat down and said, what are we doing? What do we need to do more of? How can we be better? How can we be more inclusive? We have, created a committee that has, a good deal of authority to say, like, we think that this is the best way to create and foster an inclusive environment here. And so for us as an institution that has a long tradition of representing, being well represented from diverse communities around the world, in any given year, somewhere around half of our students are international. These are questions that we've been thinking about, and we're thinking even more intentionally about them now. And it also goes for who is in the classroom teaching, who are the people we bring in as guests, who are the people in the industry that we connect you with, and your vantage point on the world should be just as broad as the world itself.
Dean Cobb, can you say a few words about our relatively new appointment of a head of DEI here at the Journalism School and what that work has entailed?
Absolutely. We have appointed a new person who is our head of DEI efforts, a person who, I think one of the things that's important is, this work doesn't just exist in a vacuum. It's not someone who's just kind of laboring and doing things, but the director and I meet regularly, and always an open line of communication. Like, I think this is an idea. I think this is something we should be doing. And when we come up with ideas, we move aggressively on them. We want to be recognized for the work that we do here in fostering a community that is inclusive.
And I wanted to jump in on this too, thinking about how the J School fosters an inclusive community. I mean, I have to give praises to the Lippman Center and thinking about the discussions that we're having in our building, some of the panels. I mean, we're having panel discussions on reproductive rights, anti-Asian violence, voting rights, objectivity and bias. And we encourage students to ask questions and share their opinions and challenge ideas that they don't agree with. And I think that builds inclusion because you're allowing people to express themselves and be seen. And we do this in panel discussions, and then I do it in my classroom and my students, and we talk about the issues of the day and how these issues are being reported in the news.
And while we're on the subject, I promise this will just be a 30-second explainer. One of the things that I'm most excited about is a project that the Lippman Center has undertaken called the Inequality Project, which is an in-depth, multi-part collaboration with a team of social scientists to get kind of groundbreaking data around how inequality operates in our housing, in our education systems, in our criminal justice systems, and then use that information as the basis for in-depth reporting. And we're collaborating with the New York Times on that. And so we're going to have a series of articles on the mechanics of inequality in the United States that will be coming out of the journalism school in collaboration with the New York Times.
That's great. I realize I want to step back for just 1 second here because I realize we have a lot of prospective students here, and I do want to introduce some of the individuals in the admissions department, because if you proceed down this path, and I hope everyone on this call does, you will interact with several of these people, part of our team that works to reach out to prospective students. First, I want to point to Taryn Almanzar, the head of our admissions office. Brett Sion, you there? Brett, yes, I see you at the top of my screen. Ross Yelsey, Edwin Isaac, and Janelle Folks. Did I get everyone? Oh, David Hooker. If you decide to apply, you will definitely know David Hooker's name. Absolutely, going forward.
John,
so let's talk. Go ahead.
Whenever you do those introductions, I always feel like we're a basketball team and everyone should run down the thing, slapping everyone's hands.
As a matter of fact, Jelani, I've got one of those big paper things that I put outside the school. So if you could burst through that on Monday morning, I'd appreciate
I
that.
think that's a good start. That's absolutely.
We're not all serious here. We're pretty serious though. But that does get a little bit onto the next question I had, which is, let's describe the Columbia community as it is right now. I want to start out by underscoring the diversity that we have in the present class this year. At the journalism school is the most international that we've had, and our student body represents many countries from across the globe, and that is one of the strengths of our class here in our community. Our students learn from each other, learn from their experiences. All the diversity that they bring to campus is very valuable. But would you like to talk a little bit more, Dean Cobb, about the environment here on campus?
Sure, absolutely. Well, even before we get to campus, let's talk about the fact that we're in New York City. And so one of the things that you'll be doing is interacting on the ground with a diverse array of different communities in reporting classes. People are going out and, in your reporting class, you'll have a professor and likely more than one professor, and you'll get some background on a community. And before you know it, you'll be in that community reporting in the most diverse city in the United States. And, I proudly am from Queens, New York, which is the most diverse county in the entire country. And so there's that element of diversity in the work that you'll be doing. And then here, as I mentioned, nearly half of our students are from abroad. And that is reflected in the work that the students do as well. An incredible array of stories. Sometimes there are students who are from India who find themselves reporting on issues relating to Indian American communities in the United States. Sometimes there are students who are from another country who find themselves deeply entrenched in reporting on a story that's very domestic in the United States. And so we have representation from, I forget how many countries it is this year. I know we have 33 different states that are represented in our group. And so—
Taryn, do you know the number, Taryn or Brett, of the number of countries?
It's from all over. I think we have about 35 to 36 countries represented. So it's pretty diverse.
So we have a kind of microcosm, of the world. And this came up just in class about 2 weeks ago, while we were talking about the dynamics of reporting from Ukraine and the politics of war reporting and all these particular complexities. And we had a Russian journalist student in the class, who raised his hand and was able to talk about what his experiences had been like. And so I think that is part of it. We here very conscientiously encourage those kinds of exchanges and encourage the kind of interaction that will make you a more broadly focused journalist and more capable of reporting and having a sense of background for different communities, different environments, and different issues.
Professor Clark, I actually wanted to have you make that more real. One of the questions we have here from a lot of students is, what advice, would you give to students? Listen, everyone comes to New York, even if you're in New York already, and they're sent out to the streets to report. I mean, that's what you do. And everyone is going to come upon a community or individuals that have backgrounds different from their own. It's one of the joys here. What advice do you give to students who are going into communities, speaking to individuals that are so different from their own backgrounds?
Yeah, well, first of all, you don't have to be a member of a certain community to report it and cover it accurately. But you have to cover a community doing your due diligence and being aware that you're going to have some cultural blind spots. Okay, that's just part of the process. It happens to all of us. So that's why we emphasize ground reporting and developing your sources. I tell people, you have to talk to people who live in the neighborhood, the small business owners, the community activists. That's how you avoid parachuting in. And that's how you avoid reading those stories where we see the generalizations and the stereotypes that creep into some of these articles when the reporters have not embedded themselves and really understood the people they're reporting on and the history of that community. I know in my classroom, we pretty much, I run it like a newsroom, and I send my students out. They cover Midtown West and East, but they cover all types of issues: immigration, education, local politics, small business, um, asylum seekers, you name it. And they embed themselves and they learn what's important to those people in those communities. And just my classroom itself, I mean, it's half international. And I can't tell you how much my students are learning from each other. Some of my students who were reporting, I mean, share their experience reporting in China and how difficult and dangerous that is. So it's an invaluable experience. I know I learned so much as a student here. When I attended this program, I'm the 9/11 class. So
Wow.
you can imagine what I was exposed to, but together, my classmates and I went to Ground Zero and we talked to all kinds of people who were impacted by what happened that one day. And deep reporting and nuance, that's what I love about this program. Learning how to embed in a community and listening to people. I think we do an exceptional job with that.
That's great. That really speaks to what we do in the newsroom. And I want to keep on that topic when we're talking about issues of diversity and inclusion going forward. So in addition to the technical and writing that's available, skills that are taught here, how else does a school teach or expose students to issues related to race, ethnicity, and diversity? I think you did mention the Lippman Center. That is one. Are there any other ways that students learn about issues, the Columbia helps them learn about issues of diversity, race, and covering and empathy toward other
Sure.
communities?
Sure. And so, it's really, my belief that things have to be not just in the classroom, but they have to be environmental and they have to be ambient. And so, the Lippman Center, which we talked about partly because I was the director of that before I became dean. But, we have a number of different centers here. Our newly created Center for Global Reporting, our Center for Journalism and Trauma, the DART Center. We have the Brown and Tao centers, all of these centers that relate to different aspects of journalism. They're all holding events throughout the course of the year. And so it's a very dynamic environment. If we're talking specifically about matters of race and inclusion and really democracy and those matters, there's, in addition to that, there's a course that I teach called Covering Race. There's another course on covering inequality. We have a number of semester-long seminars in which people get to do an in-depth dive into issues around concerning this, and also how to cover those issues more effectively. And so it's partly in the classroom, it's partly in what you get in your reporting class, is partly in what you would get in your spring elective courses. And then it's the conversations that people are having throughout the course of the day. And any given time and any given moment, you may have some conversation pop up with a speaker coming in that has tremendous insight into those matters.
I wanted to point out that later in the discussion, we'll get to some questions that were submitted beforehand. And if we get time, we'll maybe get some live questions too. We'll get to those in a minute. And I also want to point out that in the chat that Ross Yelsey is putting a lot of useful information in there, and there'll be yet more on how to connect with us, how to connect with the admissions department, some background information from some of our panelists today going forward too. So again, I really want to relate this back to the students here. What would you say, because I think we get people who aren't yet at Columbia, and I once wasn't yet at Columbia, to have an impression of what it's like here. We are in New York, we are an Ivy League institution. What would you say to people who might think that Columbia is looking for applicants with only specific backgrounds, educational backgrounds, experience backgrounds, social backgrounds? What would you say to the students who are a little bit apprehensive about applying to a place like Columbia?
Well, the thing that I always say, and I think people will probably get tired of hearing me say it, is that because journalism is about life, there is no one set of qualifications that allow you to do this work. Whatever experience that you have in some way, shape, or form will be useful to you in reporting. Because we're dealing with the entirety of the human experience. We have one student who just came in and sat in my office and was talking about his background as a chef. And he spent many years in the culinary field, and then decided he really wanted to pursue his true passion, which was journalism. And he said, well, I don't have a lot of sources. And I was like, talk to me about what you did in the course of your culinary career. And he was like, oh, I worked in this country and I was in this kitchen and I went through here. And he was like, I know chefs all over the world. I said, that's a source network. If you're covering, that's where you start. And so he was like, really? Like, that is all useful to you. And so in your kitchen, you dealt with labor issues, you dealt with issues of climate and whether or not a particular crop was available, what the price of it would be to get access to that. Those are all things, avenues that you could jump into for a story. And so I really can't encourage people enough. And then there's the other issue that sometimes I'm aware that the reputation of this place as the best journalism in the school in the world can be a little intimidating. I always tell people the other thing that I say, and people will get tired of hearing me say it, is that it's been my experience that actual imposters never have imposter syndrome. So if you feel a little bit intimidated, that's a good thing. And so that means that's a sign that you should actually do it.
And when I think about my current crop of students, some recently graduated from college, some are in their 30s, married, small children, mid-career change. They're all bringing different experiences and different perspectives. And when I think about the journalists who are successful, they're curious, they're disciplined, they're thorough, they think quickly on their feet, they're good listeners, they respect the craft. And to me, that has nothing to do with some social pedigree. So I want to encourage people to apply. Please don't think about all that sparkly ivy stuff. You have talent and abilities, and that's evidenced by people who graduated from this school from a variety of backgrounds.
I want to jump in here too and say, I think that everyone has ever read the applications here at Columbia Journalism School, including everyone in the admissions office. We get excited when we see new students from different backgrounds, different states, different experiences, because we know that we haven't seen that before, and everyone deserves a voice, and everyone deserves an opportunity to bring that voice and bring that perspective to the journalism school, and use that in the service of readers, viewers, and listeners who are eager to have people from those backgrounds come to the forefront and tell their stories and share their experiences going forward. That does get into one of the last questions I have here before we go to some questions, which is, we've said that we like people from different backgrounds, but there certainly are certain things that we look for, we hope for, we try to build upon to make students successful. So what kind of attributes will help students succeed in Columbia, do you believe?
Well, I think Professor Clark outlined some of them, but I will say curiosity, which is central, key, skepticism, which is equally key. Skepticism, not the same as cynicism. Skepticism is a value, is useful, cynicism, not so much, but skepticism, curiosity, diligence, the willingness to go back to the same question again and again and again until you get the answer that you need, and to call a source or to track down, if you have to call 30 people to find the source that you need for something. And that kind of relentlessness is generally rewarded. And I think an ability to listen to the world, listen to what people are saying to you without preconceptions. Being able to hear people and being able to understand the incredible diverse array of experiences and motivations and dynamics and histories that people have, and translate that into a fair representation of who they are and what they said, it's a skill, but it's also an art. And I think that those talents or those abilities are really what we try to hone and what we try to cultivate and develop here. And in addition, the other thing is that you can't quite see out this window, but there's the incredible library that is just across from Pulitzer Hall. And I always encourage students to make use of it. One of the finest academic libraries in the world. And so anything that you're working on, anything that you're researching, anything that you're reporting, you literally have access to this tremendous amount of data and information right there at your fingertips. And so that kind of curiosity and drive is always helpful, always useful. I think, Professor Clark, do you have anything that you want to add?
You listed all of my top on my go-to list. I would just emphasize again, just don't make assumptions. Particularly when you're reporting on groups of people, no one's a monolith, not one group. And so that's why it is so important when you are cultivating relationships with your sources that you verify information. Accuracy is key, and go back again, just like Dean Cobb said.
I will just add one last attribute. I spend a lot of time with speaking with students about their careers, and I would say flexibility and openness are so central. I think one of the great things we see here when students arrive, when they begin and they progress through the academic year, is the growth that we see and the new things that they find interesting and all the options that are available to them. And what we want, I think, from our students is to come in here and have dreams and aspirations, but have even more when they get out. Think of all the other things that they can do. Think of all the skills that they've got. Think of the other readers that they can reach. I think that flexibility and eagerness is absolutely essential to student success. Yes.
Can I add something to this too? I think I can speak on your behalf and on Professor Clark's behalf, on the behalf of all of us here, that we've been talking about the aspirations and goals of potential applicants here. But I really think that we all have a common trait of being very excited by seeing people cultivate their abilities. And that we don't have relationships with you simply for the year that you're here. We are talking about what people did who graduated 5 years ago, people who were 10 years ago, people who were 20 years ago. And like, did you hear what this person's doing? Or just the other day, I gave an award, really impressive award to someone. And 10 minutes before I presented the award, I found out that person was a graduate of Columbia Journalism School, which I had not even known. And so, there's a kind of vicarious, pride that we have in seeing what people do, not only in the classrooms here, but what they do out in the world when they're far, as far as you can get from this building on the other side of the globe, and still being representatives of this institution.
And I just want to add on that. So just last year, I actually ended up giving assignments to some former students of mine for the History Channel. And they wrote some features for this Black History Month special we did. And it was fantastic to circle back, and these students are now working journalists, and I'm editing them again, but not as their professor, but in a professional environment. And these relationships last. I mean, I'm still very good friends with some of my classmates from journalism school. I mean, these end up being classmates, your colleagues. Some might even be a future boss. You might be their boss. So something about this school, it fosters relationships that go far beyond after graduation.
Yeah, our documentary, the one we did 2 years ago, Whose Vote Counts, there was a young man who was in my class 1 year, and the next year we were working together on a documentary. It's part of the team. He's part of my documentary team, and so that's an amazing experience.
I want to get to a couple of questions that have come in during this webinar here. The first one here really gets back to this issue of diversity, and we're talking about, it sort of goes back to one of our very first questions, and one of our viewers says, in your experience, do you see newsrooms in the US committing to diverse hiring practices as well? To
varying degrees, if I'm going to be very straight up with you. What I think has happened is that there's been a long kind of tendency for people to make vague commitments to these sorts of, oh yeah, this is important and so on. What I think is different now is that there's a heightened level of accountability, that people pay attention. People are, if you have a newscast and the entire kind of set of people who you have reporting are white, there are going to be people who notice and who are going to raise the question, why have you not kind of opened up to a broader, array of people, different backgrounds, in a way that didn't happen, before. And so I think that there is, in my kind of perception, a heightened awareness about this, but the bigger issue is that there are more people checking. There are more people saying, what about this? And I said, quite frankly, in my ambitions and why I was interested in becoming the dean here, is that I imagined, us functioning as an agent to help diversify this industry by who we bring in and who we cultivate and develop and who we send out into the world as emissaries for this school.
I completely agree. And I think newsrooms, they definitely are more aware. They definitely are more aware that they'll be called out.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a challenge is, okay, once you hire, what are the changes are you making in your environment to then retain the people you hired, and creating an environment that also needs to evolve. And that you can tell there's a lot of room for growth there in these newsrooms.
Yeah, I want to read, I'm glad we have an international student who's put a question in the chat too, which I appreciate. I hope I get this right, but it touches on a lot of issues that we deal with here at the journalism school. So I want to take this on. It says, as a journalist from Baghdad, Iraq, currently in my second year in Masters of Arab Studies at Georgetown. In many of my works when I was in Baghdad and still, I critiqued the dominance of Western journalists and Western narratives, always there. Oftentimes, by the power of their passports rather than the value of the reporting itself, we as locals are marginalized. You spoke on diversity. I wonder, how is the journalism school dealing with such issues in terms of offering critical classes? I guess, we're getting back to that issue of Western dominance and Western perspective. It certainly comes up a lot, I will say,
it does.
On Columbia campus.
So I'm really thankful for that question. I got a WhatsApp message from an alum from 1994, 1995, who brought up this issue about the kind of dominant narrative, a dominant perspective of the West and of American journalists. And on the other side of it, I've had this conversation with students, not all of whom are from abroad, but many, at Columbia itself, contemporarily. So I think that, one, it's the awareness that starts with the awareness of this issue. Two, this was the thinking behind the creation of the new Simon Lee Center for Global Reporting. We are really trying to create an anchor around which American journalists who are reporting abroad are aware of the kind of perspective bias that we often carry with us, and also the way in which, simply because of the size of the United States in global affairs, our perspectives can sometimes be, can almost eclipse the ability to report in a granular and organic way from the perspectives of people in other places. And so that's something that we're actively kind of working on, and something that we want to kind of integrate into everything we do in our approach to reporting.
Professor Clark, would you like to add anything?
My students have said similar, particularly for my international students, that Western media basically just becomes the default mainstream perspective. And so we have spoken about this in our class, and they very well are bringing up a valid point. And I think some of the things that we can do currently is reading and following the works of more international reporters and journalists, and giving them a big platform. So we're not just reading an American point of view as well. And that's something that benefits us.
What I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, one of the other things I think is important is that I've made it a priority to incorporate the knowledge that journalists in other countries have about reporting on matters that Americans very often don't have. And so, we are in the kind of early stages of putting together a journalism gathering that's going to try to look at, in the particular period that we're in, the kind of rising tides of authoritarianism and the global currents that we see that are affecting not only journalists in the United States, but journalists around the world in ways that very often journalists around the world have more organic knowledge about dealing with than we do. And so when we talk about the kind of social fractures and deep polarization in the United States and the antagonisms that we're seeing towards media, there are lots of journalists around the world who have perspectives that we would benefit by listening to. And so that's one of the things that is really important to me in terms of my leadership here.
I do want to get to one question that was submitted before the discussion here, and we'd spoken a little bit about this earlier. One of the participants said, how does the J School work to include students with disabilities? Professor Clark, you've certainly had some experiences in the newsroom with different students who come with different abilities to the journalism school. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I have. So in the past, I have had a few students who have had disabilities. One student, for example, had some speech challenges. So we came together just with an individualized reporting plan, and we had some very thoughtful, engaging questions that we sent by email, and the story was the same. I had a student with some mobility issues, and we figured out, okay, should this be a phone interview, or we'll figure out a location that's going to be accessible. And of course, the school does a job of providing accommodations and support. But the main thing is that I want to emphasize is that your stories, you don't need to change them. Your reporting practices, you don't need to change them. I encourage my students, pictures are due, the stories that you're passionate about, I want you to submit them, and we will come up with a way for you to report them. Journalism, it's to me your ability. We will figure out a way to work with that.
I want to get to another question that came in before the chat, and I think it gets to some issues of diversity, but in terms of audience and reaching out and reaching new communities. That's a huge issue across the United States. You've heard the phrase news deserts. You've heard about papers closing. There's can be a lot of turmoil, although there's growth in the journalism industry right now, and a lot of our students are landing well. There's still a lot of change, but there is a real emphasis about reaching additional audiences, especially ones that have been underserved over the years. So the question that came in, it gets at some of this, I hope it'll prompt a larger discussion. The question was, how do you help students learn to create new news organizations to cover local or marginalized communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's important, that's crucial. One of the things that we want to do institutionally is support that kind of work as it gets increasingly difficult. And we can do more. Right now, we have through the Brown Center for in Media Innovation, the Magic Grants, which you apply for, and you're able to get. I don't know what the exact cap on the funding is for this year, but you're able to get grants to support innovative media undertakings, and so that's been really important for us to be able to say if there's a model of telling stories, if there's an approach to delivering information in what have been called news deserts, we want to be able to get behind that and help you both on the technical aspects of it and on the funding side of it.
And I will say, I mean, in my class, I'm not teaching how to create new news organizations, but I will say that I encourage my students to go after the stories of overlooked communities. I think that's where we can do some of our most important work. And some of my guest speakers, I invite a variety, some from the more legacy newspapers, the New York Times, the Washington Post, but I actually also invite non-traditional journalists who specifically cover marginalized communities. For example, last week, Co Bragg, who's a Spelman grad, she also is a J School graduate, but she's a freelancer and her work appears in certain things, a website called Scalawag. I mean, that is specifically dedicated. All the content is about oppressed communities in the Deep South. So also in my class, you learn and are encouraged to go after stories of marginalized communities that are overlooked and underreported.
That question does get a little bit into the career side, which is the end of your valuable career here at Columbia, but we have a very robust career department. And one of the things that we've done the last couple of years is partnering with something called INN, which works primarily with nonprofits. And nonprofits, a lot of them focus on underserved communities. And it's been a great opportunity to get our students into different communities in Mississippi, in Hawaii. You might not think they're underserved, but there's a lot of underreporting in certain far-flung states like that. We want to really get them out into the country. And it's always that balance, I think, with new students, is we want them to obviously pursue their dreams, but also do it in an environment where they can network and learn, continue to learn, and land in a place where they're part of a journalism community as they pursue the rest of their journalism career. You can see that Ross Kelsey is putting in yet more information into the chat, and there will be more going forward. I want to see if I think I have. Oh, there's a direct question sent directly to me. Let me see. It says to both of our speakers today, can you speak to the safety of students of color at Columbia Journalism School? We as journalists put ourselves in many risky situations, especially when it comes to issues of race and assumed political difference. I myself have been the target of during protests I've covered. Is safety something that is on the priority list?
Yes, and so there are like several tiers to that question. So I'm going to try to deal with them in order. The first is, depending on what program you apply to, if you were in the MS program, which is our biggest program, one of the first things that you're going to do is take your reporting class. And in your reporting class, these matters will come up. The best practices of how you approach stories, circumstances that you should be wary of, circumstances in which maybe you find an alternate means of getting information. And these are not just things for starting journalists. These are things that I still go through, the checklist that I still go through when I go out and I do stories. In addition to that, there are particular dynamics around race, but particularly in the United States and the kind of recent history that we saw of kind of tremendous social upheaval following the death of George Floyd. And in those instances, we had very specific advice that we had to people when they were going out. Everything from keeping the phone numbers of your lawyer written on your forearm, so in case you didn't have access to anything else, you have that person's number on you, to determining who it is that you go out with other journalists from other outlets, and how you partner in those ways. So yeah, those are things and that we think about very seriously. We take very seriously, and then quite frankly, there's another added element of this, which is that there are gender dynamics. Very pronounced. And I had one of those just last year, where there was a student who was reporting a story, and the story was very important, but the source was behaving in ways that, that seemed to portend, danger. And I said, we're going to actually find another way of getting this information, or we will pull the plug on that story and do some other kind of related story that doesn't involve this person. And this is something that not just Columbia Journalism School has to think about, but every news organization has to think about in terms of how their people approach the stories that they're going to cover. So that's a long answer, but the short version of it is yes, it's very important to us.
Okay, I will just jump in here, but I do want to get to Professor Clark for a second to talk about some of the instructions that students are given before they go out in the streets of New York. But one of the other good things about being part of the larger university is it's just in very, very specific terms about, we have, during our orientation, we have discussions about public safety on campus and off campus, just as any school would. We have training that we give that is required for each student's coming in at orientation. But Professor Clark, would you like to say a little bit more? Because you've run into some situations where students have gone into uncomfortable situations.
Well, for instance, some of my students who might want to cover various protests. Some students a few years ago, there was reproductive health protests, and you just never know. But again, like in any newsroom, we have a plan before my student even goes. We have cell phone. This is what happened. If this happens, you call me. What if I'm confronted with a police officer? What happens? Normally they're partnered. If not, where are you standing on the perimeter? I mean, I'm very specific because safety is the most important. Yes, you want to have a learning experience, but you really do have that reporter-editor relationship, and the safety of the reporter is the most important. So with my students, we really have a 1, 2, 3, 4 plan, and they have to be in touch with me before they leave. I need a check-in, kind of a text during the event, and when they're on their way home. Those are kind of non-negotiables.
No, I will reiterate that one more time. Safety is absolutely essential to what we do here at Columbia University, not just the Graduate School of Journalism. And it's, that's always a starting point going forward. Now we're getting ready to wind down, and there might be some specific questions about admissions, but I want to talk a little bit more about that. And if you'll watch the chat, you'll see Ross putting yet more information in the chat, I'm pretty sure. We are in the middle of our application season here at Columbia University. We've been open for a few months. I encourage all of you to go to the application link. I encourage all of you to reach out to anyone on this chat with more questions going forward. Our application for our main program, our Masters of Science, is December 15th. If you are interested, I urge you not to wait till December 14th at 6 p.m. after dinner to start your application. But I would like you actually to take a look at it now, relatively soon, and reach out to us. Pretty much everyone at the top of this call here is ready to answer your questions. You can see there's the link in there right there. So that is our main application deadline, December 15th. That's for the Masters of Science, including our data degree. January 6th for our Masters of Arts degree. We didn't talk too much about the delineation of our degree, but it's all on the website. Masters of Art is generally for students who've been in the business a little bit longer and really want to take their career to a new level. And then our application deadline for a dual degree with computer science is January 15th. Did I get that right? Yes, it is. I also want to say we have a number of upcoming webinars going forward. There are many ways to stay connected with us. We have weekly online chats on Fridays. We have drop-in office hours with our admissions department, more information sessions. It can all be found on the Meet With Us webpage. You can drop that in there, right? And all of us are ready to answer your questions. We really, we enjoy this. We enjoy this part. We like seeing new people. We like answering their questions. We like starting journalists on their career or taking it to a new level. So I hope that this conversation has been useful. The issue of diversity and bringing different voices into Columbia University and nurturing those voices so that they can go out in the world and cover those communities that appreciate that and cover those stories that need to be covered. It's absolutely central to our mission, our admission here. Dean Cobb and Professor Clark, would you like to say any final words?
Well, I think you said it very well. We're here to engage. We're here to use the best of our talents to help you cultivate your talents. And I also say that we are a rigorous institution. People come here and they work hard. And the promise that I make to everyone who comes through the door is that you will work very hard, but you will never work harder than the person who's in the front of the classroom. That for everything that you're trying to do, well, we're here with you every step of the way. And when you finish that project, that you didn't know that you were able to do, and you have that skill set that you weren't aware that you possessed at the end of this. We will be as proud to see you do that work as you will be of yourself.
And
Professor Clark, can I give you the final word here?
Well, I was going to say, just as a graduate of this program, what I learned has been invaluable. I mean, and there were times where I was so stressed out. I really was. But I learned so much, and the professors here give you the tools. I mean, we really do. We give you the tools. We are there to support you, encourage you, and we do push. But you come out with so much knowledge, and I can't tell you how proud I am when I see my students not only graduate, when I'm reading and it's their byline, or I'm looking at the credits at the end of a documentary and I see it, oh my gosh, that was a student. So it has been an invaluable experience for me as a student, and I love it now on the other side as a member of faculty.
Well, I want to thank everyone again. There are some links at the bottom. I think there might be a couple of questions we didn't get to, but reach out to us. I want to say that one more time. We are eager to hear from you, to meet you, to have discussions. Any discussion is great. So I urge you to reach out to all of us, and thank you everyone for being on the call today.